In life, there are moments, there are events that take place that have such a great impact on your life and on the life of the world that you never forget that moment. And I mean, this is more than just remembering something that happened in the past. It's that moment that you can still see. The images are crystal clear. You can still hear the voices. You know exactly where you were. And perhaps most importantly, you can feel now what you felt then, even though many years have passed. November 22nd, 1963. I am in the first grade, and all these years later, I can still see the speaker of the intercom in the classroom, and I can still hear the voice of the principal. It sounded like he had been crying when he announced to the school that President John Kennedy had been assassinated just an hour before in Dallas, Texas. January the 28th, 1986, I am in my third year of priesthood. It was a bright, cold morning. I was at a meeting at the Diocesan Center in Islin. It was in Islin at that time. And I can remember and still feel the disbelief when I was told that the Challenger space shuttle, a program that we had been following for weeks because the first teacher was going to go on board and go into space and teach lessons, that it had exploded just minutes after takeoff, and that there were no survivors. September the 11th. I don't know if we will ever have to put a year next to that month and that date. It will be forever remembered as that blue-skied morning. There was not a sign of anything dreadful. It would become a day of disbelief and fear and uncertainty. And by the time dark came of the evening, it was a day of heartbreak that was unbearable and unbelievable. You know, at the Ascension, Jesus promised his disciples, I will be with you always, even until the end of the world. 19 years ago, that Tuesday in September, it felt like it was the end of the world. But there was faith. There was faith. The Mass that we organized for that evening, quickly, it was packed. The entire church was filled, the gathering space. They were crammed into the chapel. And I can still see every person who was there. For one brief moment, as evening fell, we all stood together on the promise of Jesus that he would be with us always, even to the end of the world, and in every moment when it felt like the world we knew was ending. And we were with one another. We stood with each other in the weeks that followed. Yes, as a parish, but as a local community, and certainly as a nation. 19 years later, we find ourselves in a very divided and difficult time. It's a time of worry and uncertainty and anger and fear. But we also are called at this time to do what we did years ago, to carry each other. I still hear the words of Jesus, I am with you always, even until the end of the world. Those are just not nice words. It's not a good slogan to pull out to make you feel better. It's a truth that I know in my heart. It's a truth that I have felt. It's a truth that I have experienced in all of these moments that have caused doubt and worry and fear. I know it can be trusted. But I'm transported back to that terrible day in September, and to also see the images of goodness and kindness and comfort, gestures of love between strangers. I am with you always. You know, one image that has always stayed with me over the years was in the days that followed in Manhattan, on street poles, on buildings, on the plywood barriers of construction sites. People put up pictures of those who had been in the Twin Towers, desperate to find them, with the written pleas, have you seen this person? I recall one woman writing about her experience looking at this huge amount of pictures. She writes this: wedding pictures, graduations, beach picnics, parents and a baby, studio portraits, along with the questions, do you know anything about my husband? Were you with my sister? I feel I have to view them all, do my part to carry the weight. She writes, I'm looking at some new ones, crying, of course, when a man kindly asks, did you lose somebody? No, I say, just everyone. And then he cries. We don't remember those we lost on that day for historical, political, or social reasons. We remember because they remind us we are one human family, and a stranger's loss can move us to tears because we know what it means to be afraid. We know what it means to lose someone, something. We know what it means to love. And by saying that, it's not, again, a nice sentiment that we're going to sit around a campfire and sing about. It's the truth of who we are. It's the truth of who Jesus says we are. And when we forget that we are one family, that a stranger's loss and joy are my losses and joys, when we forget that, when we don't see it, when we don't hear it, when we don't feel it, when they just become words, that's how we lose our way. I realize there is so much happening in our world and in our country and even in our personal lives that can seem overwhelming, even bigger than ourselves. And we may feel frustrated and helpless. And maybe, understandably, some of us just put our heads down and don't even want to look because it exhausts us. We don't want to think about it. But I remember that woman who wrote about these pictures. She said, I feel I have to view them all, do my part to carry the weight. How do you think you could carry the weight, not only today, but in the days ahead? Maybe it begins for those of us who remember, who were around at that time, a tearful remembrance of that day 19 years ago. Maybe for you who are parents, it's a time for you to sit with your children and explain not only what happened on that day, but who we were, what we discovered about ourselves, where faith carried us. And so maybe then it becomes a time of quiet prayer, not only for those who suffered on that terrible day, but also for those who suffer now, for those who struggle in ways that we understand and ways that we don't. And maybe it's a willingness in our daily life to look and to listen more carefully, to feel more deeply. You know, sometimes that carries the weight more than we could ever realize. In 2015, Pope Francis visited Ground Zero, and he said this at that site: the lives of our dear ones will not be lives which one day will be forgotten. Instead, they will be present whenever we strive to be prophets, not of tearing down, but of building up, prophets of reconciliation, prophets of peace. His words are words that we need to remember and to live, especially in what is going to probably be very contentious weeks that are ahead of us. That we will be prophets of building people up, of reconciliation, prophets of peace. You know, on September the 11th, many of those on the doomed airplanes and in the Twin Towers, they realized their death was near. And so they called their family and their friends, and all they wanted to do was to tell their loved ones how much they loved them. And you know, hearing that in the days that followed, so many people wound up saying, I need to do this while, I'm not in a desperate situation, to call people and to tell them what they mean to them, what they mean to us. Perhaps you might do that today, not because you've watched this YouTube video, not because it's September the 11th, but because someone right now in your life might need to know you're thinking about them. They might need to hear, to feel your presence, your voice. It could be the way you remind yourself that the promise of Jesus can be trusted. I am with you always. That's how we carry the weight. That's how we show others that the promise of Jesus is true.